All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Doing that thing you do, breaking my heart into a million pieces, like you always do. And you don't mean to be cruel. You never even knew about the heartache I've been going through. Well, I try to forget you, girl, but it's just so hard to do. Every time you do that thing you do.
And welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell, and for the next 2 hours, I'm your host and your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. The X Zone is a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until midnight, right here from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, on the X Zone Broadcast Network from our main affiliate. That's right, Classic 1220, and streamed around the world on classic1220.ca. If you'd like to send me an email, the email is xzone@classic1220.ca. X Zone Nation, my guest this hour is Charles James Hall. We're going to be speaking to James about his encounters with the Talls. And we're going to be talking to Charles in a few moments. But what I'd like to do is bring on the lady behind the gentleman, his wife Marie, and I've had the pleasure of meeting both Marie and Charles in person. And Marie, welcome back to the X Zone.
Well, thank you for inviting us, and I hope you are delighted, too, because for several years now we have been turning down all invites to do talk radio, but we are going to have a second documentary coming out. The very talented Swedish filmmaker, Marzak, is right now working on editing a follow-on to the first film. And I understand that Amazon didn't carry the first film, Walking with the Tall Whites, in Canada originally. I thought that they had recently decided to carry it in Canada too. Have you seen the documentary?
No, I haven't.
Oh, well, and if you can't get it on Amazon, it's a free download on Tubi TV too, Tubi.
Yeah, I subscribe to Tubi and I love the programming on it.
Well, I should have told you that earlier, and then maybe you could have watched it. But anyway, he was so pleased, and also Amazon was so pleased that he wants it put in more markets. He'd already done, subtitles for Germany and Japan, but they want to show it in other venues as well. And so he's also working on that, as well as working on a follow-on documentary.
Now, Marie, when you first met Charles, did you have any idea that you would be with Charles talking about the Tall Whites and going all over the world talking about them and Charles' experiences with them? Did you have any idea at all?
Oh, heavens no. He did not tell me about extraterrestrials until we'd been married a couple of months. That was in February of 1970. I think he thought it might have been a deal breaker for him to tell me about his experiences with extraterrestrials before that time.
Right.
So, but when he told me, he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, I never really thought about whether they exist or not, and I really don't care. I just hope that if I met any, that I would behave in a manner that was a credit to the human race. But I really put it on my back burner for, 30 years, busy raising a family. We have 6 children. And it wasn't until I came into the computer room and he shut the screen very quickly. I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm working on a book," which kind of amazed me. I mean, he'll be talking till 3 days after he's dead, but I didn't think of him as a writer. And I said, "Would you print some of that out?" And this was on an old dot matrix printer.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
And I went into the other room and I read for about 20 minutes, and I came back and I said, "We have to publish this." And he said, "Oh, I was just writing my memoirs for our grandchildren."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Well, I won't stop them from reading it after we publish it." And he was very hesitant. He said, "Well, you know, the Air Force really has, they never told me I couldn't talk about it, but on the other hand, they haven't been very forthcoming during the past 40-plus years at that time." And I said, "Well, what you do is you disguise the names of people and places and just write it as though it's an ordinary novel." And he still, "No, I don't think so." I said, "Look, if the men in black come to the front door, you should go with them. It's free room and board." And he laughed and he said, "You're right. What do we have to lose?" And so it took quite a bit of work because, you know, it had to be
Sure.
reformatted, and I had to do a lot of editing and probably didn't do enough editing, although I didn't want to destroy the flavor that is Charles.
Yeah.
But anyway, I thought the first book, excuse me,
Sure.
the title, by the way, was my name, my idea. Because if our grandchildren are going to have to deal with these people from other planets,
Right.
they are going to have to learn to be better humans. They are going to be, have more hospitality than currently. And so I thought the book was fine.
Mm-hmm.
And then my girlfriend said he needs to write more. She actually is a writer. She read the manuscript and she said, "Well, it's not really my cup of tea, but it's really good and he should write more." And I said, "Well, he can't," because I said, "This is all true." And I told Charles what she had said, and he said, "Oh, well, I have more stories on my computer, and I have more that I haven't written down yet." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Well, I was with them for over 2 years." So anyway, it is 6 books now, and in the 5th book, he talks about the Greys, because he actually had several TDYs where the Greys are. It was the children of the Greys that crashed at Roswell. And then the 6th book, I don't know if you read it or not, I sent it to you along with Beyond Relativity. We actually put 2 books out during COVID.
My God.
And anyway, the people he calls the Norwegians with 24 teeth, he had actually met as a teenager in Wisconsin before he ever went into the service. So anyway, I think he is quite anxious to talk. I mean, he's happy to talk about the tall whites, but he would like to talk more about the Norwegians with 24 teeth. When we Skyped Bergen, Norway, several years ago, they were very familiar with that anomaly. There are people in their population who have either the 24 teeth, not the genetically coded for 32 as all of us are, or something in between there, like say 28 teeth. And in fact, they've been here and have intermarried. So the thing that Charles is most interested in, of course, is his Hall photon theory. And when you appreciate the ramifications of it, you can see many things in a different light. For instance, the Webb telescope recently has, produced these pictures, and Charles has, in fact, put up a Rumble video about mirage galaxies, because when he looks at them, he sees things a little differently than the physicists who, are still hanging on to most of Einstein's conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, I think he'd be happy if you would ask him questions about, either the Norwegians with 24 teeth or his Hall photon theory.
I'm going to ask him all those questions because he is one of the most interesting people I have ever met. And, I remember the first time I spoke to Charles must have been about 20 years from now. I've been doing the show now for 35 years.
It was in 2005 in Las Vegas that we first met you.
Right, but Charles had been on my show and other shows previous to that. And I must say that he is one of the most credible people I've ever met.
Thank you.
All right. You and I have to take a very short setup commercial in a few moments, but I'd like to take this opportunity to tell the X-Zone Nation that the X-Chronicles newspaper is now available, and this is the April 2024 edition, and all you have to do to get your free complimentary copy of the X-Chronicles newspaper, full color, 92 pages, is go to www.xchronicles.net. That's XCHRONICLES.net. Now, this is the X-Zone, a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And we come to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until midnight, right here from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, on the X-Zone Broadcast Network and your hometown radio, Classic 1220, and streamed around the world on xzbn.net and classic1220.ca. Charles Hull is my very special guest, and we were just speaking to his lovely wife, Marie.
Of 55 years.
55 years. God bless you. I say to my wife, honey, what's it like being married to me? And she says, I just thank God for vodka. All right, we'll be back after this commercial break as we continue here in the X-Zone. Whatever you do, don't go away. I'll be right back.
Capacities, to telepath messages through the vast unknown. Please close your eyes and concentrate with every thought you think upon the recitation we're about to sing. Calling occupants of interplanetary craft. Calling occupants of interplanetary most extraordinary craft. Calling occupants of interplanetary craft.
And welcome back, everyone. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and you're listening to us on the X-Zone Broadcast Network and your hometown radio, Classic 1220, classic1220.ca. My guest this hour is the better half of the team. We had Marie on first of all, and she is the wife of Charles Hull, and Charles is a former United States officer airman. He has captivated audiences with his extraordinary claims of encounters with extraterrestrials being known as the Tall Whites. Hall's story is chronicled in his book series, Millennial Hospitality and Walking with the Talls. It provides us a unique and mesmerizing glimpse into his interactions with these otherworldly entities. Now, Charles' experiences reportedly began during his time stationed at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada in the 1960s. Charles says that he encountered the Tall Whites while assigned to the Indian Spring radar site near Area 51. These beings were described as tall, slender, and pale, with elongated features and significantly advanced technology. Joining me now is our good friend, Charles James Hall. And Charles, welcome back to the X-Zone. Always a pleasure talking to you, sir.
And it's always a joy to be on your show. Where would you like me to begin?
Well, I'd like to begin at the beginning, Charles, because over the years we've amassed a newer audience that's been with us for all these years. And why don't you tell them the beginning, how you first met the Tall Whites in Area 52? Am I correct?
That's one of the areas. Yeah, the areas at Area 51 is just the entrance area, in the portal area.
Mm-hmm.
The areas went from 51 all the way up to 60, and I've been in all of them. When I enlisted in the Air Force in July 1964, they give you lots of tests, and I got perfect scores in mathematical ability and all sorts of things, but one was in logical reasoning, just watching things and just watching the world around me and putting things together. And they said that I was supposed to go to RIA school, but they blew my orders and gave me my cover orders by mistake. My cover orders were to be a weather observer at Nellis. And so they shipped me to Nellis. The Pentagon wanted me there in the first place. And so I spent 2.5 years out on the gunnery ranges at Indian Springs, which are the back door to all of the areas, including Area 51. And I found that that when you're standing in Indian Springs, Nevada, which is, 90 miles or so in those days northwest of Las Vegas, and you're looking straight up the valley, but in those mountains at the north end of the valley, there's a huge base that dug in underground that the U.S. Air Force built for the Tall Whites. And that base extends underground. It may even extend over to French Peak, and they're tunneled in. And I've personally been in front of 3 different types of extraterrestrials: the Tall Whites, the Roswell Greys, and the Norwegians with 24 teeth. And I'd met the Norwegians with 24 teeth before I joined the Air Force. I met them while I was still in high school in Cambridge, Wisconsin. And the Tall Whites have the best technology, and their craft, Tall White craft, clearly can travel many, many times faster than the speed of light. I mean, like certainly 100 times, maybe even 1,000 times. They're really, really high tech. The Roswell Greys, which I've personally also been in front of, they're in between. They have the medium technology. Their craft can travel many times the speed of light too, but maybe like 50 or 100. When you look at the Gray craft, which I have, deep space craft, and the Tall White craft, you can see where the Tall White craft is like a cut above, On the other hand, the Norwegians with 24 teeth can just barely travel in space and just barely make it to Earth from their home planet, which is very close by. I'm not sure where, but I think it orbits Bernard's star at 5 3/4 light years.
We were talking about you had your encounters with the Greys. You also had the encounter with the Tall Whites, but
the Tall Whites have the best technology, and the Greys have the second best. Both of their craft travel many times faster than the speed of light, but the Tall Whites are greatly superior. The Norwegians with 24 teeth can just barely get here from from their home planet, which I think is Barnard's star. I'm not sure about that, but I believe it is, at 5 3/4 light years. And they've all three of them were here by the end of the last ice age. The Greys came first, and the Greys consider this part of space to be their stomping grounds. They're not territorial, in that, space is so vast they don't try to protect people. They don't put up a boundary. But the Greys certainly have bases on the moon, and the last ice age began about 25,000 BC. So I feel certain the Greys got here by at least 20,000 BC. The tall whites got here at least by the middle of the last ice age. I feel certain that they got here by at least 16,000 BC. And the Norwegians started coming here somewhere around 11,000 or 10,000 BC. And the Norwegians came here with 24 teeth. Their home planet is half iced over, and their climate at the equator, it orbits a red star, which is Barnard's star, like Barnard's star, and their star, the climate on their equator is very similar to southern Norway or the southern Scandinavia, or Ontario, Canada, or Wisconsin or Minnesota, and so you can find them spread out all along there. And I first encountered them in Wisconsin before I went in the service. When I went in the service and when I was sent up to Indian Springs, the tall whites are the ones that cooperate. They're so much like us when you run into them that it's shocking. It's just that, they have the same emotions. I think the same. All of them have men, women, and children. None of them are robots or hybrids or anything, and they're all different. The tall whites and the Greys are kind of natural enemies. They kind of fight like cats and dogs, but for probably the same reasons. But the Greys came first and have bases on the moon, but the Greys, their military bases are on the moon. But the Greys in order to support those bases, put agricultural bases here on Earth, especially in Nevada. During the Ice Age, it was like a wonderful place to do that, because...
Charles, I remember having you on the show a number of times, and you said that you had seen the ships come into Area 52, and it was like Area 52 was like a terminus?
There's the bases are at 53 and 54, and they were coming into Area 53, which includes Dogbone Lake. Okay. And the living quarters, their main hangar and landing ground is Area 53, and then their living quarters were Area 54. And those areas were physically the northern half of Indian Springs Valley, and went over to the next valley over, including Dogbone Lake and the Desert Game Range, and then they were also over on French Peak, and I know they're they were tunneled in under French Peak as well. And they'd been there since the Ice Age, then in those valleys, and one of the surprises I had was, naturally, they knew that area better than any human ever would. The tall whites live longer than we do. They live like 600 or 800 years.
Wow!
And their skin is as white as a piece of paper. And the Greys live 200 to 300 years. And the Norwegians with 24 teeth told me their life expectancy was 141 years. And so dealing with the extraterrestrials was one of the oddities was that you didn't have to tell them anything, like we had a Revolutionary War, because they, like the tall whites had personally been living when the Revolutionary War was going on. And so it was like talking to a person that had seen Washington and his army march around the East. And their technology I further describe in my books, and so I won't go into it here. But they could, the technology, if they had it adjusted correctly, they could communicate with their electronics. They're not telepathic, and so you could communicate with them by thinking. And Donald Rumsfeld, who's dead now, I'm certain was one of the negotiators that met with them, along with Ehrlichman. I'm certain because I saw them out in Indian Springs Valley.
All right, Charles. Charles, please stand by. We've got to take our break. Exonation. Charles Hall is with us.
Sure.
He is visit his website. He's got some great books there. You can also find out more about his movies at www.millennialhospitality.com. I'm Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. Don't go away.
Okay.
Upon the recitation we're about to say, calling occupants of interplanetary craft, calling occupants of interplanetary most extraordinary craft. Calling occupants of interplanetary craft. Calling occupants of interplanetary craft. Calling occupants of interplanetary most extraordinary craft. You've been observing our like to make a contact with you. We are your friends. Girl, you really got me going. You got me so I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, you really got me now. You got me so I can't sleep at night. Yeah, you really got me now. You got me so I don't know what I'm doing. Oh yeah, you really got me now. You got me so I can't sleep at night. You really got me. You really got me. You really got me.
Charles Hall is our special guest this hour, Exonation. The website is www.millennialhospitality.com. And you're listening to us on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, and on the X Zone Broadcast Network, streaming at www.xzbn.net and classic1220.ca. Now, Charles, before we go any further, the base is on the moon. Does the government know they're there?
The government knows. Yes. Oh, yes. In 1965, see, the tall whites have in 1965 the tall whites had a cooperation agreement. The American government would provide them with their bases here on Earth, and supply them with anything they wanted that America had.
Mm-hmm.
And in return, the tall whites would help the American government with technology transfer if it benefited both nations. They weren't going to give us everything. They were just going to cooperate with us to the extent that it was to their advantage. And one of the things they used to do that I personally watched when I was a weather observer out in Indian Springs Valley was they would take small groups of American generals, like 2 or 3 at a time, no more than 5, and their scout craft, of course, could day trip not just to the moon, but to the moons of Jupiter if they wanted to, because there's extremely high performance. And so what they would do is they would use the tall white pilots were very safety conscious, and so I used to watch them come down when the moon was in just past the last quarter, the fourth quarter, and therefore was on the inside of the Earth's orbit. They would come down from the, and I would be out at range 3 as the weather observer, and I was the special. My clearance allowed me to go anywhere I wanted, anytime, And nothing I did was ever classified, and I could never be ordered off the ranges, and so I was that special person that could talk to both the tall whites and humans. I was never part of any project of building or anything. I was just the weather observer, supposed to go out and do cultural exchange. And I'd watch them bring the scout craft out from the base at the north on the mountains on the north end of Indian Springs Valley. They would come down to the valley, to the bottom of Indian Springs Valley, just west of the Range 3 shack, weather shack, perhaps a mile. They were physically at the campsite of the Bennett family, the Lost 49ers, which is a nice area to camp in, which is in that valley. And then they would deboard and sit down. There'd be like a half hour or so before sunrise, and then they would open up the covers over the windings, the fiber optic windings that are the hull of the spacecraft, and make sure that they were at room temperature. And then they would close them when they were happy, and after the sun came up, like 20 minutes or so after the sun came up, they would all board, then the tall whites and the American generals who were with them, and nobody below the rank of bird colonel, and there was only one of them, and they would, close up and lift off, and then when they got up about 10,000 feet, they'd power totally up, and then they would head for a place just between the moon and the sun, just above the moon's surface, where the gravitational field of the Earth, moon, and sun are the same, and that's in front of the moon as it moves in its orbit. And then they would slow down and they would go around the moon and show the American generals the far side of the moon, okay? And of course, in the fourth quarter, half the moon is always lit and half isn't. And they would do that, and then they would come. They would spend, they would several hours on the moon, and then it only took them like a half hour to make the lunar crossing, because they were running the craft in low gear. They could have done it in 2 minutes if they were really going to turn it up the speed, but they were very safety conscious. Then when it was like 11 o'clock in Indian Springs Valley, then they would leave the moon and come back, having shown the generals both sides of the moon, half of it being sunlit, the front half being sunlit, and they'd come back down to the valley and sit there, and then they'd stop and open up the door and let the generals out. And when the generals got out, they were laughing like they'd come off a merry-go-round ride at Disneyland. They were physically bent over laughing their guts out. And of course, the reason they had me there, they would do it in front of me, is because as a weather observer, I had the thermometers, and they always worried about the coils running hot. And of course, hot could be 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, so it wasn't that I had to go up and actually test the craft. All I had to do was see if the air, like 50 feet from the craft was, for 2,000 degrees, puts out heat a long way. And if everything looked normal, then they were happy. Then the generals were happy. I wasn't doing it to make the tall whites happy. I was doing it to make the American generals happy, because they weren't, they most of them were on their first trip, and there were just a few of them. And then they would open up the covers over the coils and let them cool off, and then they would go back up to the base, and that let the generals see the front half of the moon in sunlight and pick landing craft for the Apollo missions and so on. And then a couple weeks later, when the moon was just past the new moon, they would come in the afternoon and do the same darn thing and have me out there with the weather, with taking temperature readings of, from the hill and checking to make sure there weren't any stray, super hot currents. And they would and when they did the same thing, when the moon was after the new moon, see the other half of the moon, Tranquility Base, and those were sunlit, so that let the generals see both sides of the moon, and and a couple of astronaut pilots it let them see both sides of the moon in the sunlight, take pictures and so on. See, in the tall whites, so when they were planning how to do that, then they, the tall whites would help the Americans in that way. Now the Greys, the Greys also cooperated with the Americans but to a very minimal extent. When the Americans built the two-man version of the X-15, and they would use that to circumnavigate the moon also later on that year. But of course, the problem they had, the X-15 had, the two-man version, was that when it was coming back from the moon on the free return orbit, if everything went fine, then that was great, and they would land at the various places that the Edwards and so on that they'd picked out. But when the X-15 coming back, the two-man version, hit the upper atmosphere at 85 miles, if everything went fine, no muss, no fuss. But if it didn't, if they started heating, then they'd have to escape maneuver one. Now, both pilots had their own separate escape modules, and there was living quarters on, because the two-man version was much bigger. But then the place where those modules would come down, if it ever happened, would have been in the Valley of the one of the valleys of the Greys. And the Greys hadn't allowed a human in there ever. And I was the only human the Greys would allow in there. So then they would have me walking around the valleys of the Greys, watching the sky at like midnight and when the X-15 was coming back. And then nobody told me anything. I was the weather observer. I was just an enlisted man. So, I was already trained in what to do in an aircraft accident. And they would just have me out there releasing weather balloons with lights on them, of course, at night, which show up on radar. And if the X-15 the two-man version had ever gotten in trouble, then the place they would have tried to crash land was in the valley, the place where the desert valley, which is way out in places like central Nevada or California that I can't describe. And I would have been there, and it's not that I would have known what to do. It is that the Greys were willing to let me to talk to me, and of course, as an enlisted man, I could talk to the officers if they survived. So they'd have a friendly face on the ground that could tell the Greys the condition of the men, or could be the first responder. Not that I knew anything about medical science or repair or whatever, but because I was trusted by both sides. Nothing ever went wrong, so on those runs, I just got to sit out there at night and wonder why the Greys were out there in the sagebrush watching me, the children of them and the teenagers, and a few of the adults watching me from a distance. Sometimes they'd come in as close as a quarter mile, sometimes not, but just letting me know they were there if I needed to do anything. And so I got to see a great deal of lots of things, but nobody ever briefed me, nobody ever debriefed me, nobody ever showed me any classified documents. Whatever went on, I had to figure out for myself. Now, the Norwegians with 24 teeth, since their home planet, the weather, the climate on the equator is just like southern Norway or southern Canada, like Ontario, that's where the Norwegians with 24 teeth feel comfortable. They don't really like deserts, although I have seen the Norwegians with 24 teeth out at Camp Mercury, and stuff. But see where you are in Canada, if you were talking to a dentist, let's say like in Ontario, and you were to say, have you ever seen an adult who still had his baby teeth? Because the Norwegians with 24 teeth have been coming here since the Ice Age, and they have intermarried, and many of them have forgot their ancestry. Am I still connected?
Yeah, you're still here, Kevin. I'm sorry, you're still here with us, Charles, but please stand.
From
Charles.
their point of view, they're as human as you and I are.
All right, Charles, we're going to have to take a break here, so please stand by. Exonation, Charles Hall is our special guest. His website is www.millennialhospitality.com. And we'll be back as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, on the X Zone Broadcast Network, coming to you on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, and streamed at classic1220.ca. More about Greys, tall whites, and Norwegians with all those teeth. Oh my gosh. We'll be back. Don't go away.
24 is the baby teeth.
Yeah, you really got me now. You got me so I can't sleep at night. Yeah, you really got me now. You got me so I don't know what I'm doing. Oh yeah, you really got me now. You got me so I can't sleep at night. You really got me.
Long, long time ago, I can still remember how that music used to make me smile. And I knew if I had my chance that I could make those people dance, and maybe they'd be happy for a while. But February made me shiver with every paper I deliver. Bad news on the doorstep. I couldn't take one more step. I can't remember if I cried when I read about his widowed bride, but something touched me deep inside the day the music died. So bye-bye, Miss American Pie. Drove my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry. And them good old boys were drinking whiskey and rye, singing, this'll be the day that I die. This'll be the day that I die. Did you write?
And welcome back, everyone. Charles Hall is my special guest. His website is www.millennialhospitality.com. First of all, Charles, thanks very much for joining us tonight. It's always a great pleasure talking to you. But I have to ask
you for having me.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. I have to ask you, if there are bases on the moon, and if the military have gone up in scout ships, why do we need a congressional hearing on UFOs if we already know the truth?
I'll give you one example, and I think that'll answer the question. When I was at Indian Springs, I had one of my friends that I described. He took an oil tanker out to Range 4 to refill the tanks one day in the summer of 1965. And he encountered the tall whites, the family, out at Range 4 playing in the hangars, the old World War II aircraft hangars out at Range 4. And he was absolutely terrified, but he knew they were real. They shut down his truck just so he wouldn't, get into any trouble. And they finished playing. It took a while, 45 minutes or so, and then they turned on his truck again and got in their scout craft and went off. And he was an awfully nice guy. And when he came back to tell me about it, he was like, I was out at Range 3, and the next day when he came out to tell me about it, he was like terrified of them. And now he had seen them, and he knew they were real. And he was still terrified, and I was trying to calm him down. I was saying, well, they're just people like you and I. And, men, women, and children, and, just talk to them the way you would, any of your neighbors or whatever. They won't hurt you. And he was certain that they were monsters from hell. And he looked at me like, we were like brothers. And he looked at me like I was totally out of my mind. And he didn't, to even be out there where they were. And if you had said, well, if you want, I can introduce you to, either a teacher, Range 4 Harry, or whatever. But there's no reason to be afraid. If all you have to do is don't do anything sudden, just, and there was no way And on that day, there was no way he could believe they were anything other than demons or mutant monsters or whatever. And he had seen them, and he had seen they were just out there playing with their children and having a picnic. And so when you say, why is the government so touchy about like congressional hearings and so on? It's because if you just had a party at the UN and said, here, land, and let's have some strawberry jam, because they're plant eaters. The tall whites and the grays do not eat meat; they're strictly plant eaters. The emotional reaction, the terror that would sweep through everybody if you hadn't prepared them is just unbelievable. The tall whites who first come here are more afraid of us than we are of them, and people who haven't seen them before are naturally terrified of them, just because it's such a shock. They're so much like us, and they're so different in appearance, and they live so much longer, and just getting it takes a while to get over the shock.
Can I add something?
Sure.
Yes.
One of our fans a couple years ago wanted to go out there and capture one and bring it to her house, keep it as a pet. I mean, there are so many people in our population that, might want to go out there and shoot one for a trophy. I don't blame. Yeah.
I understand that, but Charles has documented on the air many times where these places were.
I know, and there are people who always contact us and say, where should I go to see them and all that kind of stuff. And, of course, we have to caution them to not go anywhere that it's posted they shouldn't go, because the guards there don't have a sense of humor about it.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, a gentleman that we've known for years and who has done contracts with the government at all the various bases had not been to Indian Springs, now Creech, until a few years ago. And he said when he went there that the place is much more guarded and terrifying than Charles had. He thought Charles had underplayed the security in the book, and he said he was it was a ribbon cutting ceremony that they were there for, and he said there were no lower ranking airmen there, just generals and top officers. And he was standing next to one general whom he'd known for years. They were good friends, and he said, do you mind if I just drive up the road a mile or two? I won't get out of the car, just look at the terrain. And the general said, that would be a very bad idea. You might not come back. And then just that quickly he said, I'm so glad you could make it for this. I
Sure.
didn't say what I just said.
Let me ask you this: why don't
when they say lethal force will be used, they mean every single frickin' word of that.
I'm sure they do with good cause. But let me ask you this: why did you write your books if you don't want the location or any harm to come to these visitors?
I wanted my grandchildren and great-grandchildren to know what I had experienced. Okay. I wanted, and in the books I'm trying to cover how it felt to go out there in 1965 when UFOs were swamp gas and drive 40 miles out into the desert where you're beyond every human, and to be standing there at night tracking a balloon and turn around and discover that there's the teacher, the tall white lady, standing within arm's length behind me. And it was easier to see the extraterrestrials than it was to see the craft they came in, because the craft is their safe escape. And so they're more willing to show themselves, and they never come alone. They're always come in groups. And you can't imagine the terror. Even though they're friendly and they didn't come to hurt you, they just said, "Oh, you're looking at the balloon. How do we? Can we look too?" You know, and because it's the cultural shock. I was never part of any project. I was never briefed, debriefed. I was never showed any classified documents. One time I asked one of the guys from the Pentagon, I said, "Why was I never briefed?" And he said, "Don't you understand that none of us know what their culture is like or what's going on out there. If there were a briefing to be given, it would have to be given by you. And to be out there by yourself, and as I explained in my books, I had a very high clearance, and I could go anywhere I wanted, day or night. But the rules were, if I ever got in trouble, I had to bring myself alone. I alone, me and God, had to bring myself back to safety or die trying. And it came to that more times than I care to remember. When you read my books, you'll see I did more than just stand there and look at them. I almost died on a whole bunch of occasions, one of which was, as described in Book 3, the day of the accident, when they cut me down and thought they'd killed me. But I don't want to get... But as I described in the books, with God's help, I pulled out. Another time was when I was out in the valleys of the Grays, and it was in the wintertime, and I was on ice in that north side canyon, and I'd fallen down, and I was sliding towards this ravine, which was certain death, and I was holding on to onto my equipment case, trying to stop, and I was on a solid downgrade, and the equipment case, and I was finally caught on a rock, and I couldn't have been the width of my hand from that precipice, and I was out there alone. There wasn't, not even human guards were out there, or allowed to be out there. I was like 50 miles past the last human, and when I finally was able to get off there and get back out from the canyon area, there was a large rock, and I sat down there, and I was in tears. I was given prayer to thanking my guardian angels and God, and I was in tears because I'd have died. And another time when I was trying to come out of the south side
Charles,
canyon, and I was caught in the mud.
Charles, I hate to do this, but our time is up for tonight.
That's what I was trying to tell my sons and grandsons and daughters and so on.
All right, Charles, thank you so much for joining us. Marie, thank you for joining us. And Exo Nation, if you'd like to get copies of any of the books, visit the website, millennialhospitality.com. That's www.millennialhospitality.com. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break as the X Zone continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, on the X Zone Broadcast Network and your hometown radio, Classic 1220, streamed around the world on classic1220.ca. Wow. Talls, Norwegians, Greys, going back and forth to the moon. Fascinating story. Fact or fiction? You be the judge. I'll be back on the other side of this break as hour number 2 commences right here with yours truly, Rob McConnell. Don't go away.